Hi, well, my name is Ari, and I'm from California. I am a transgender woman, and that's kind of the basis for what we're going to be talking about today. I do a lot of activism, mostly over the internet, where I kind of spread awareness about, you know, my transgender experience and things like that, and information regarding transgender issues. And that's mostly what we're really excited to be doing on this radio show.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Benny. I am trans-identified, also genderqueer, not transitioning. And so I think between Aaron and I both, not only are we together, literally in a relationship, but also we kind of take on a different trajectory of kind of what trans can mean. And so part of this show is going to be not only talking about trans issues, but also intersections around class and race, even religion, sexuality, all types of different discussions, which really kind of connect us to a show that plays on Wednesdays, Isn't It Queer, but also kind of takes us in some slightly different directions as well.
Definitely.
So, I guess where I want to kind of begin with is some of the directions with the show. One of the big things that we want to focus on here is not only trans news and commentary that Aaron and I are going to have, and we want to continue this off the air.
Right.
But also
like transgender politics, kind of issues surrounding it, and stuff we see in the news, and really just talk about what's going on with transgender people, because it's not something we really hear in the media every day. So
absolutely. And another component is going to be art, world making, culture, music, and so we are always on the lookout for trans, genderqueer, gender variant identified musicians, artists who especially are working on their own side recordings, what have you, that we can try to get the word out there, interview folks, have them on the air, talk with them, so we can kind of really expose them to the world, broadly speaking, I suppose.
Yeah, because we do plan to archive this, and we'll tell you where that's going to be archived. But yeah, I mean, if there are any trans, genderqueer identified folks that you don't have to be creating music necessarily, but any sort of art that you'd like to share, whatever you're doing or working on, is really important to us.
Absolutely. Let's talk about where we come from, for those who don't know us. Aaron and I have been here in Carbondale for 2 years. We come from sunny Southern California, quite a ways away, and I'm here for my graduate degree in speech communication. And Aaron?
Yeah, I followed Benny over here, and interestingly, that's kind of when I started beginning my transition. So a lot of my transition has been here in Carbondale.
Yeah, and I think that that's going to be a huge component about where we're speaking from, is going to be Aaron's transition, but then also together as a couple, because I do see that if you're in a relationship, that transition is a couple thing, that we're doing that together, and how we negotiate and kind of navigate space and place. And I think particularly how we've had to find creative ways of accessing resources.
Definitely, yeah. It's been quite the journey.
I guess where I want to move now for us is going to be into kind of the broader discussion of where you want to touch on today. This week we don't have any artists, musicians that we're turning to just quite yet, as we're trying to learn how this all functions. But we do want to touch on just a little bit gender dysphoria, because this was a question that was brought to us by a number of people through our Facebook, and we'll share some of the connection information, Facebook, YouTube, and all that at the end.
Right. This is really all about your understanding of what a transgender person is, because a lot of people have all these different definitions of what a transgender person is. So we're kind of just, this is a process, to understanding what and who transgender people are, and that we are, we're living all around the world, and just, we're trying to kind of build that.
And I think that's a really good point as we move into gender dysphoria. One of the positions that Aaron and I take for Beyond the Binary Radio, it's a very broad umbrella, if you will, version of trans. be that genderqueer, transgender, transsexual, gender variant, cross-dresser.
Right, and these are all terms that are, you know, important for us to define and take seriously, and how they, you know, attribute to people's entire lives and why it matters, you know, today.
Aaron, can you turn us towards the idea of gender dysphoria, how you understand gender dysphoria, what it is, how even you've had to negotiate it, perhaps?
Right. You know, there's different levels of how gender dysphoria is diagnosed, which is what it is. It's somewhat of a diagnosis, you could say. I would argue that not every transgender person, you know, has all of the criteria that most doctors want to transgender people with. But what it really is sort of how I see it for myself anyway, because it's hard to have an all-encompassing definition for these diagnoses that transgender people are, you know, initially diagnosed with to gain access to transition resources, what have you. But for me, it's like this kind of this. Well, for one, it's intense depression, anxiety, social anxiety. It's dealing with, you know, discomfort with your body in relation to how you relate to the world, relate to yourself.
Sure.
So I really kind of define it as a sort of repression of my gender and how I felt about, you know, my gender growing up got really complicated and shamed based on how I was supposed to be according to my gender assignment, which was male, you know, at birth. But I never really felt that I was male, and it's kind of something I think a lot of people that don't understand this find fascinating, because they don't have this thing called gender dysphoria, which, you know, you basically feel that you don't really think too much about your gender, really. You just kind of, it's very natural for you, but it's always been an issue for me. And kind of mending that gender dysphoria can be through certain transition venues that you can take, you know, certain transition journeys. Not everyone transitions physically, like, you know, Benny here.
That's me.
But it was definitely an option for me, and I needed to take it and have been taking it to sort of mend that gender dysphoria.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, excuse me, I'm wondering if we can, I mean, ultimately I want to take this conversation towards, because we kind of rehearsed in our minds at least, taking this discussion towards body positivity, and then ultimately to the notion of accessing athletics, as well as maybe even more locally the SIU Rec Center, as a trans person, and how gender dysphoria may play into the notion of playing sports in various capacities. And so I'm wondering, before we get there, something that kind of came to mind is I'm wondering if you wanted to say anything about pronouns, because it seems to be a very staple item around dysphoria.
Okay, so, you know, you're not always going to know if you're in front of a transgender person, but pronouns are a very sensitive issue in the trans community, because it is kind of it's kind of who we are. It's being able to validate our transitions and what have you. You know, I do prefer female pronouns. I prefer she and her pronouns, and yeah, it validates me and makes me feel normal. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've certainly had all kinds of experiences here around pronouns, and it seems like a lot of times pronouns can sometimes, for those who are not, I don't want to say aware, but maybe are not so readily affected by pronoun use, don't understand how the quote wrong, whatever that might mean, pronoun can really trigger bouts of gender dysphoria, because in some way it kind of creates an ongoing process of a reminder of you're not passing, you're not passing, you're not passing, you're not passing.
Right, and we can talk about what passing really means, which is, you know, passing as the gender that you're transitioning to, so people, you know, see you as the gender that you are, right? And I like to be seen as a woman, and to sort of access that, it's really important for me that people are using she and her pronouns for me.
Sure.
And people don't always do, even when I request it, but that's sort of a part of what it means to be transgender, is, you know, those little things, right?
Yeah, and the name of our show, I guess that brings me to, is Beyond the Binary, which is, I guess more than anything, we are approaching this, and the reason we chose this title was to, at one end, kind of affirm that whenever you're discussing or engaging gender, and we all embody some form of gender, what have you, whether or not it's in relation to this binary, the binary being masculine, feminine, male, female, what have you, is that a trans body oftentimes, but not always, exists in relation to that same sort of binary, but at the same time, sometimes often challenges it whether or not we want to. And I think that one of the frustrations I run into is when trans bodies are the bodies used to make points about gender, as opposed to, or under the guise that apparently normative gender or normal gendered individuals don't. They themselves are at the same time reifying, supporting the binary, challenging the binary in the most minute ways that maybe we, quote, fail at our gender roles.
Right.
Yeah, you know, I came across this article on Huffington Post, and this is what kind of brought me up to this idea of, I guess, working out. It's a very interesting blog on Huffington Post, written by Justin Adkins. And Justin Adkins recently started a new blog called transjock.com. I recently signed up to this myself, and it's really a community of trans-identified athletes, but not just professional. I mean, I'm by no means a professional athlete, but I certainly do enjoy running. Admittedly, not lately. I have not been running as much as I'd really like to. But it's a space where trans-identified individuals are able to collaborate, talk about negotiating like locker room spaces, what it means to have to be kind of coerced into those public shower spaces or avoid them as a trans body. And I wonder if you had any thoughts about any of this discussion here, particularly maybe accessing SIU's rec center, anything you've run into.
Well, I signed up for the rec center at the beginning of the semester, thinking that, oh, I might be one of those gym people that looks bronze and healthy and what have you. And I was really excited about it. And I went in a couple of times, but I kind of I don't know, I didn't really enjoy going in there, you could say. I felt nervous most of the time, and wanting to use the swimming pool, I didn't really know how to access it since it was through locker rooms, and I wasn't really sure what choice to make.
Can we walk through, I think that this is the conundrum, I'm sure that other people in the area and at other places that are listening to this, other schools, other places experience the same conundrum here. The conundrum, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, we've had this discussion, is that if you were to access, for instance, a male locker room versus a female, or female versus a male locker room, what does that mean as you exit it going into the pool?
What do you mean, does it entering the male locker room in general?
Yeah, because what would you wear to go swimming, for instance?
Oh, right. Well, I would, of course, have to wear something that covers my top
absolutely
area.
And so what does that mean, right? Like coming out of a male locker room, right? So there's this inherent kind of, trans bodies, I think, inherently challenge the binary assumptions even of a locker room space or gymnasium,
right,
or what have you. And most recently, I was engaged in a focus group with the rec center here at SIU, and there's talk of, and it looks like they're moving forward, of creating a gender-neutral locker room space, a space where not only gender-variant individuals, but also in terms of physical ability, different types of able bodies, whatever that ability looks like, are able to access things like the pool or what have you, which is very interesting and very nice, and I'm really eager to see.
Yeah, that is so awesome. That is something that I didn't expect coming here, where for people that care about transgender issues, but they do.
Why didn't you think they would care?
I don't know. I guess it's the small town aspect to all of this, but I really wasn't knowing what to expect.
Sure.
There is that kind of myth between urban and rural spaces, of how, the comfort level I would feel as a trans person, but it is so great to see that people are.
Well, I think it's one thing, living out here in the Midwest on one end, the furthest south, almost as south as you can get in Illinois, practically in the South itself, and how those kind of feed into that urban-rural divide. And I think that you and I living here, that has been challenged in really good ways in terms of the community that we've created, the networks that we have located and found. And I'm hoping that future shows we can really get into this urban-rural divide and some of these discussions, particularly around trans bodies, not just around gay and lesbian bodies who might pass as normative gender in some way, whatever that looks like.
Our focus is mostly going to be transgender issues.
Yeah, and I think that accessing some of those resources in cities, like I did see, frankly, back in California, not just because it's California, but in other larger cities, much more different types of gender-neutral spaces, including restrooms, locker rooms, what have you, that allow for a relatively safer space.
Safer, yeah, definitely. Definitely not better though, and yeah.
I'm wondering if you could say a few things about how dysphoria might play into,
you know, like public restrooms and assigned areas, or.
Well, we could, yes, that. But specifically, if we can maybe try to find like a way that gender dysphoria or forms of dysphoria can really connect to other types of body dysphoria, whether that's excuse me. Different types of size or ability, and how that might intersect also with gender dysphoria, different types of body issues that individuals might have as a point of connection between different types of bodies. Does that make sense?
Can you explain that further?
Well, sure. I mean, when it comes to issues like, let's say, for instance, I'll deal with, for myself, one of the main issues why I never wanted to transition, still struggle with whether or not I'm going to move in that direction, is because of the size of my body. And as a result, I feel like it's not just gender-based dysphoria, but for me it's also like a size-based dysphoria. It's an issue of I struggle with the actual size of my body, and what that means in terms of not just masculine, feminine, but also different types of sizes, and how that might even lead to like ability, for instance, different types of dysphoria.
Right. It's really difficult when we talk about this, because then we have to go into like the idea of passing, which I think is something we're going to be talking about a lot on this show, is passing as the gender you want to, and almost the fact that a lot of transgender people don't pass as the gender they want to, and they sort of, you know, deal with that in society. And when it comes to how your body looks when you're putting on clothes and stuff like that, it can really sort of make you resist transition options. And there are trans women that are six feet tall, right, over that, and really big women, as well as men, being quite the opposite, just how that sort of goes biologically for males and females. It's really interesting, and it's something that's really important to talk about, because it goes into what femininity means, and it goes into what masculinity means, and it's kind of redefining that, and it kind of speaks towards how certain bodies are privileged in passing. You know, certain bodies are going to pass more than others are going to, you know, based on what you sort of start with, and that's kind of goes into how just privilege is so relative towards, you know, the individual, and you know, what they're dealing with as a sort of canvas for their transition, and kind of what they want out of their transition too, can sort of affect whether or not you take those drugs, right?
I'm wondering, we had a lot of, seems like a lot of followers that are new to me and to you, whether it's Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, what have you. And it seems like one of the questions that come up a lot, whether it's in person or online, is accessing transition resources out here in the Midwest. And I know this seems like a drastic sharp turn real quick, but I think on our first show it'd be really advantageous to point people in maybe the direction that you and I have taken in terms of accessing those. Where did we find them?
Sure, yeah. Specifically for me, you know, I started therapy in California when I was 18, and I'm 22 now, and you know, that sort of is the route you may want to take first, is really accessing a form of therapy.
And what about those? I mean, the problem though with that is the idea of money.
Right, is that it costs money. I think talking to someone about your transition is important and whether or not it's right for you. But I mean, I think you would know, right, whether or not transition is right for you. And if you decide to physically take the route of transitioning, yeah, there are definitely options that.
Yeah, and the model that we use here, and by we I do mean Aaron specifically, because I myself am not transitioning, is the informed consent model, and that's something that we've been accessing, at least up in Chicago.
Right. Okay, so the informed consent model is sort of just a different way of accessing hormones. You know, there's sort of the way of where you have to go through therapy, and you have to go through a certain amount of therapy and all of that stuff, and you have to, you know, there's all of this criteria that goes on when it comes to actually accessing hormones, which is you know, a way to transition. It's called hormone replacement therapy, or shorthand HRT. And informed consent is really exactly how it sounds, which I accessed through Chicago Howard Brown facility. Is you basically go in and you consent to wanting to go on hormones. You do talk to someone kind of about transition and why, kind of quickly. It's very modest. It's very awesome for those who want to take this route. It's for me, it's actually inexpensive, and it was an awesome way to access hormones. Did you want to talk about, just for a second, on why you decided not to transition then?
Oh, sure. I mean, frankly, I mean, there's a ton of reasons why I chose not to, and I don't want to say I didn't transition, and I often that's how my narrative kind of gets spun, right? Is that Aaron transitions, I don't, and that's because there's sort of this outward manifestation. When I was younger, and I don't want to fall into any traps in terms of like a very traditional narrative, but when I first came out back in the 90s, I did come out as a gay young man, and I came out as a young gay man in Long Beach, California, because that was one of the few identities available in the area that I was living in. And that was really fulfilling for me, and I found a home, and it's still a home that I graciously call a home. But it was something that didn't quite satiate what I needed, because I, at the time in the 90s, didn't know about trans people. I just didn't have access. What I knew of were drag queens and cross-dressers, and that was not me. Those things were not me. Drag maybe, sure, absolutely, but not in the same way, perhaps, as others. And so one of the reasons I didn't, quote, transition was because as I started seeing myself finally as a trans person well into my 20s, at that point I had done so much mental and emotional labor at learning how to just satiate and desire the body that I had, that I felt like a lot of that transition was an internal working for me. And I was able to find some sort of ease in terms of being okay, if you will, with this outside marked gender. And this is where I found a home with genderqueer, largely, which allows me to be read as masculine as male, sometimes, especially around my voice, being misread as female or as feminine, particularly on the phone, which you and I laugh at quite often, because I like going on the phone, putting it on speakerphone, because I'm often called ma'am, or drive-thrus, or what have you. And I think part of the reason I didn't physically transition was because I had come so far emotionally and mentally that I never really saw it as something that I actively desired, except in retrospect. Like that whole, if I could do it over, probably.
And you can transition at any point in your life, so do you ever still consider the possibility of physically transitioning?
I do quite often, and this is where one of those realistic tensions of being in a relationship the way that we are is that, realistically speaking, I worry that if I did transition that we may not be together anymore in terms of general attraction, right? Part of the reality is that you have this attraction towards this relatively masculine body, and what does that mean if I were to transition and to change that?
That is so true, and that's what a lot of transgender people kind of deal with in relationships when transitioning, and it was, you know, between us, a fear for me as well, and it's definitely something that is quite scary when you love someone that wants to physically transition, because it really challenges that. So I think we're not really coming to the end of our show, but we're definitely going to start touching on some closing things. Are we ready to almost touch on those closing topics?
Yeah, I mean, we have about 6 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we have time to at least mention the show briefly.
Right, Nico's show.
Yeah,
right?
really, well, it's not Nico's show, but Nico certainly had a really helping hand in bringing this group here. Tonight at the Kleinau Theater in the Communications Building at SIU is a very special one-night show. I'm really personally looking forward to this for my own performance work and my own practice. The way that Nico has described this show, I am completely excited about this. But we do want to just advertise this real quick. Tonight at the Kleinau is the 7-person chair pyramid high wire act, a play, presented by Der Vorfolk Effect Theater. And this show is written by Donna Oblongata, designed and performed by Donna Oblongata and Patrick Costello, and directed by Sarah Lowry. And I would like to read the description because it's so beautiful.
Please do.
Okay. In the wilds of Siberia, Charles Darwin goes off in search of the Yeti. The Yeti, if she exists, enters a radio station's dance contest, hoping to win an all-expenses-paid vacation to a place that doesn't exist yet. Darwin's research companion, a little brown bat, falls in love with the radio station's electromagnetic emissions, but how could that ever end happily? Meanwhile, Siberia's caves are home to a secretive tribe of rope makers, but their disintegrating family structure may cause their ancient craft to be lost forever. Through the lens of the real-life allegory of the Flying Walenda's famous high wire act, 2 performers on a tiny stage unfold Darwin's laboratory, unfurl anatomic diagrams of the Yeti, and try to tease out the difference between miracles and non-miracles. So that's going to take place tonight at 9 p.m. in the Kleinau Theater. They are taking $5 donations, though it is stressed that if you do not have the funds, you will not be turned away. But the donations are strongly encouraged. This is what's allowing this performance group to travel their art, their livelihood, if you will, and their art basically just around the country. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that, absolutely.
Yeah. That sounds awesome.
That's kind of the big announcement that we wanted to make right now. Mm-hmm. And I guess what we have here as we develop Beyond the Binary are a slew of networking sites, trying to connect them all. It's a big old mess.
We talked about a lot of complicated issues that take a lot more than 30 minutes to really dive into. So if you have any questions, if you have anything, there are ways to contact us, and that's kind of what we specifically are here for.
And part of our dialogue is continuing a lot of this, including new side dialogues on these other venues. And so I kind of want to read some. First off, if you have questions, you can certainly email us, and our email is BtB, as in Beyond the Binary, BtBradio@gmail.com. Twitter, it's @BtB Radio. And then on Facebook, it's Facebook / spelled out one whole long word, Beyond the Binary.
Is it Beyond the Binary Radio?
For Facebook, it's just Beyond the Binary.
Okay, so that just to be clear, I think on our Facebook there are ways to sort of access the Gmail, right?
Absolutely.
Right, there's all of that kind of crazy information. So if you just want to kind of go to the Facebook, it's facebook.com / Beyond the Binary. Beyond the Binary,
and you can check us out there. We're also on Tumblr, btbradio.tumblr.com. We're all over the place, and we're hoping to continue a lot of these dialogues. Particularly around news issues that need more elaborate commentary that hopefully we can bring into the studio. But again, this is a new project, and we're really trying to develop a community out of this. So we're looking forward to working with each of you out there, hearing your feedback, and working with us. I suppose we could say until next week, thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And we look forward to developing this with you. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.